Try this one on for size. With J.P. Morgan at the turn of the century, it was his gold that he had. Okay, he didn't go out and borrow it. It was his. This isn't the government's gold that they're bailing them out with now. Where is the government borrowing the money to control the banks? China. Why is this bad? Why shouldn't we borrow all this money from China? They'll give it to us. What? It's just money. Well, this goes back to a memory of mine as a kid. When I was first decided I was going to go into a small business around 2000, I became a small businessman. I vowed not to borrow any money because of something I remember my father saying to me when I was a kid. We owned a bakery, City Bakery, in downtown Mount Vernon, Washington. And I remember saying to my dad, "What do you mean you got to go to work tomorrow? You don't have a boss." He just looked at me and said, "Son, everybody has a boss. My boss is the bank." Mr. President, everybody has a boss, and your boss is China. When we found out that China was selling our children lead-painted toys and poisoned dog food, do you remember that? Do you remember anyone saying, "Why isn't George Bush really saying anything?" Imagine if an American company or a British company were selling kids chewable lead-based toys and poisoned dog food. You think we wouldn't have hammered the bat snot out of them? Of course we would. Why didn't we say anything to China? Well, the same reason you usually don't go up to your boss and stick your finger in his chest. You don't bite the hand that feeds you. China, I hate to break the news to you, now rules the world. Wait until you see tomorrow's episode. Worse, the White House now has gone further for China. The White House now has told our spy agencies to lower the priority placed on intelligence collection on China. What's that mean? I am told by contacts within the CIA that we only experience cyber attacks from China on a daily basis. When we can't say to somebody, "Stay away from our secrets," because we'll lose their money, we have become slaves to them. But beyond just being afraid to stand up to them, is it possible that this is some sort of payment to the Chinese? By not tracking their spy activities as aggressively as we always have, are we just actually paying a higher interest rate on our loans? Think about this. How much did our stealth technology cost? Now, if we don't catch them stealing our stealth technology, what is that? Is it possible that's payment on the principal? I said before, as soon as China demands a higher interest rate for all these loans that we can't pay back, it's over. Everyone said, "No, that'll never happen. China needs us to buy their crap." Really? Nobody will buy their bamboo umbrellas except us? What is this move by Obama to say, "Hey, let's stop looking at them so much"? We're already hearing, as we did during the State of the Union address, that the worst of this financial crisis is over. No. They're going to start pointing to the GDP growth in the fourth quarter of around 5.7% as proof that they fixed the problem. They haven't. They haven't spent 2/3 of the stimulus money yet. Why? Is it possible they're saving it for when things really start to look bad? During election season this fall. The progressives need it to look like our economic problems have been solved. But they haven't. They've only been made much, much worse. Because? Debt. The debt. The fact that all of this is unsustainable. Our debt is $12 trillion on the top line, but the unsecured loans are $107 trillion. There's no J.P. Morgan that can loan us $107 trillion. We long ago dropped the gold standard. We don't manufacture anything more to sell for profit. What are we making that's going to make up $107 trillion? Even during the Great Depression, we had 3 things missing from the terrible situation we faced then that are not missing now. Everybody says, "Oh, we'll get out of it. We got out of the Great Depression." Think of these things. During the Great Depression, the massive debt that we have now is missing. Our debt to GDP ration in 1929 was 16.3%. This year, the estimates predict that it will reach 94% of GDP, and in 2011, 99%. Unsustainable. Second thing that we didn't have in the Great Depression that we have now, unfunded liabilities. Remember, there wasn't a Social Security or Medicare program to fund. This is our most crushing debt. $107 trillion. The first one is $12 trillion. 107. There is no way to ever pay that off. And 3, we didn't have the total personal debt. People were not living lifestyles on credit. And people owned their houses and they could grow their own food. So now what can we do with a debt that's unsustainable? Well, we can stop living in the fantasy land. We can tell ourselves we better wake up right now if we want to control our own country. We can get ourselves out of debt so we are not slaves personally to anyone else. We can take control of our personal financial situation. In 1907, Americans thought it was a terrible thing to be beholden to J.P. Morgan. We believed that it gave him too much clout and influence over the government. But today, we're infinitely more beholden to communist China. The $65 million that J.P. Morgan loaned to the government in 1895 is equivalent today to $1.6 billion. We spend that. I think we started spending that and probably finished by the time this monologue is over. Our current debt is $12 trillion, and we've promised $107 trillion more. Who owns us? Better yet, who owns our children? Quite honestly, I'd like to go back to 1895. I'd rather be owned by J.P. Morgan. At least he was a capitalist American, not communist Chinese. But we're doing it to ourselves. You might say, oh, Glenn, that's ridiculous. China's a great trading partner. Really, there's no problem. Remember the poisoned toys and poisoned dog food? Yeah. How about this one, the Clinton influence buying scandal? Hey, remember that we sold seaports in California to China back in the 90s? And now we're taking them off the spy list and saying, don't look so hard over there. Do you really think they're not going to steal anything? Really? May I show you the cover of a book over in China? This is great. Here it is. You gotta make this big. Bring this up. Look on the corner. Recognize that little boy there in the corner with the glasses? Yeah, it's Harry Potter. This book popped up in China before the ink was even dry. Unauthorized, incredibly bizarre stories, stealing J.K. Rowling's beloved characters and work everywhere. They were everywhere in China, including a version of the boy wizard as a fat, hairy dwarf. China's response? We're looking into it. What? Our national debt has become a freakish, fat, hairy giant, stealing from our children's future and dishonoring our founders and everything they stood for, and quite honestly, I think, dishonoring us in the eyes of the rest of the world, and more importantly, in the memories of our children. Now ahead on the program, Bill O'Reilly, and next, the Super Bowl and health care. Oh, you'll love this. Next.